How do you pick the right wedges for your game? Well, in today's video, I'm going to go through the process that I went through to help you make a better choice when you buy your next wedges. Guys, before we get stuck into the video as well, if you want free tech advice and you want me to be your free golf coach, hit that little subscribe button down there. Loads of great information to help you get better and beat your mates when you're out on the golf course. Let's get stuck into today's video. So I recently got fit for 3 brand new wedges, the Titleist SM9 wedges, and I went through the full fitting process to help me land with the lofts, the bounces and the grinds that I've got to help me actually fit the right wedges to my game. And today we're going to go through those 3 stages that I went through that'll help you make a better choice and hopefully get the right wedge in your bag, because I guess a lot of people, and I see a lot of people when they come for lessons, they have wedges that maybe you have a 58 and a 60, you have a 56 and a 54, and there's lots of gaps out there. And the first thing that we did was talk about that gapping.
If anyone's considering putting wedges in, the biggest thing with Loft is the gap in distance.
Right.
What I wouldn't like to see, you're fine, but if somebody's unaware of what the loft of their pitching wedge is, for example,
yes,
and then they're carrying a set sand wedge within the set,
yeah,
there could be sort of 8, 9, 10 degrees of difference in loft between those,
yeah,
and a huge gap that they're not really aware of.
Yeah.
They may also possibly be a bit clustered or have too many clubs with head covers on that perform quite similar. So a conversation that we might have is, can we take one of those clubs out that performs very similar to another one and get that extra wedge in from a gapping perspective?
So the first thing that we did when I went down to Vale Royal Abbey to get fit was actually talk about, well, what loft was my pitching wedge and how far does it go? So at the moment I'm using Strixon ZX7 irons. My pitching wedge is 47 degrees and it goes 135 yards. So the first thing that I wanted to do was hit some shots and find the loft that would be appropriate to fill in a gap, because what's tending to happen now, a lot of golfers will see a huge gap from their pitching wedge to their next wedge along. Because irons are getting stronger, we used to see that 48, even 49 was the loft of a pitching wedge. We're seeing them get up to like 44, 43. And then when you go into your sand wedge, which might be a traditional 56, if you're sat at 44 degrees and then 56 and you've got that 12-degree gap, you're probably going to see maybe a 30-yard margin in between each club, let's call it 170, and it's not going to be ideal. So I've ended up with a 50-degree here, and I'll show you for why. If I just hit one here on my GC3, just show you the number that it comes out with. So 122 there with that wedge, and what I actually saw on an average was that the 50 was going 120 yards. So from my pitching wedge down to my 50 now, I had 15 yards gap. So 1 club difference is pretty much what I was seeing throughout the set. When I'm going 7, 8, 9, I'm seeing 12 to 15 yards gap. So when I put the 50 in the bag, it then fills into that 15-yard gap, as where I had a 51 before and it was getting up to about 115, 118 tops, and it was creeping into 20 yards difference, as where just adding a single degree of loft and getting the right bounce, we found that actually I was able to get that 120-yard mark consistently. Also, what I was able to do by getting the correct bounce, I've got an F full grind here. What that does is allow me to see it go through a certain window. So when you're maybe getting a little bit more skilled with your wedges, you want to try and control the flight each time and not see that they're popping up out into the sky too high. And with this one, after some testing, I found that that was the loft, the bounce and the grind that I wanted, that gave me that consistent distance, gave me the consistent flight of window, and ticked those boxes for me. So the first thing to do, if you're going to go and buy some wedges and you're looking to fill these voids in your bag, know how far your pitching wedge is going. Also handy to know what loft your pitching wedge is. So just simply maybe at the pro shop, they'll just measure it if they've got a loft and lie machine, because then you can fit into your next gap. From there then, we moved on to my next wedge.
I would think personally, if somebody's got a pitching wedge like you that goes in the 130 mark, I'd like to have one. 100 yards is always a good number to have boxed off. If you can have something sort of 95 to 105, and then you've got your 130, it makes sense to plug the gap with one in between around the 150, 120 mark, ideally. The question that a golfer maybe should ask themselves is, where are they using this club the most?
Yeah.
Is it the 50-yard shot? Is it a chipping club? And if it's 90% of the time being used for a specific purpose, make sure it's best performing in that scenario.
Right. Okay. So the next gap that we wanted to fill was pretty much that, a gap wedge, and I've ended up with a 54 degrees, so 4 degrees away from where my 50 is. And the reason for that, again, is to do with a little bit of distance. So this is going to be my more versatile club. So with this one, it was that shot, well, what number do you end up on the golf course was a lot, one of the questions James asked me. And it was, well, I end up with 100 quite a lot. And he said, well, what would you hit 100 at the minute? I had 51, 56. And my 56 was almost like try and hit it full out to get it 105. And it wasn't comfortable as much as maybe where this 54 was. So the next way is filling that gap really. You've got to look at it as probably now you're having your secondary pitching wedge, your gap wedge, and then some form of lob wedge. And this gap wedge here, I've ended up with the highest bounce out of all three wedges, 10 degrees, an S grind, so a little bit of sole's been shaved off at the back to allow me to be a little bit more versatile when I'm in around the greens, but it hits that number again for me. So when I'm at 100 yards, instead of thinking, right, I've got to smash a 56 or try and hit a 3/4 51 or a 50 now, I know that with just a comfortable 54, I can get up to my 100-yard number. One of the other things about finding that gap is being able to be versatile in that sort of 30 to 100-yard window. So with the 54, it feels like I can get the half swing that I want and again control that flight and be able to hit the little knockdown shots, hit a little bit of a higher, softer one, be able to open the blade up a little bit more because I've got that S grind on it, but then also have something with that 10 degrees of bounce that isn't too sharp in terms of it being down at like a 4 or a 5, so I don't feel like the leading edge is digging, but don't feel like the lip is sticking out too much at the front edge when I'm hitting those shots. So that 54 there, like I say, is really about finding that gap, and that's sort of stage 2 if you were to go and get your wedges fit. So get that pitching wedge, find the gap, and then that brings me onto my third and final stage, my lob wedge. And this is where bounce and grind comes in, because it can be a little bit mind-blowing with those ones.
That's, of the three options we've got in the 54, that sort of sits in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm now going to give you the one that's slightly lower, which is our S grind. And we'll hit that a couple of times, and then I'll give you the one that's slightly higher, which is F, similar to what was in the 50 that we hit to start with. The F is a full sole, and the 10S actually starts life as an F, but you can see we've just taken the trailing edge out a little bit, and it's just a few degrees less angle in there. And for yourself, you're not overly steep, you like seeing that leading edge sit nice and tight. It's slightly favourable.
So lob wedge, I've ended up going for a 60 with 8 degrees bounce and the M grind. Now there are quite a lot of options for grind. So the grind, when you hear that talked about, that's about how the bottom of the golf club looks. As we can see here, it looks like there's almost different levels to the sole of the golf club. So here we see it being cut away, it's shaped a little bit different here, and then it's got some heel relief around this side of the heel of the golf club. Like I say, there's many different options, and that's all to do with how you like to play the wedge when it's actually sat down. So do you like it sat square? Do you like it sat open? How do you actually deliver the golf club? Do you need more heel relief as you actually play your shots? Do you need a more wider sole, a bigger sole? Are you someone who's a real sweeper when you're playing your wedges? That's how the grind comes in. And basically how we came to choosing the M was through trial and error. James, after watching me hit some shots, had an idea of what would probably suit my eye and what would suit my style of pitching. But then, like I say, trial and error. So we went through hitting some different shots in and around the green to try and say, well, no, I like that one. No, I don't like that one. That one looks good. Oh, that one looks a little bit too stuck out for me. This one, and X, Y, and Z. And again, I think with the Titleist way they have the Sure Fit now, and you're able to actually change the heads on them, it gives that ability to actually go and try all these different models. In terms of bounce, again, that comes down to a little bit of how you're delivering the golf club. Is it steep? Is it shallow? And then also, what type of turf you're playing on, because here at Warrington, where I play probably 70% of my golf, there's a little bit of rough, there's quite spongy fairways, there's quite spongy, just semi-rough, so I don't need super tight bounce. I don't need like 4 degrees. Also, I want a little bit of relief if I do ever get a little bit too steep on it. So that's what we came down to with this one. Like I say, it's more of that trial and error as you're starting to hit different shots. So when you get into your full wedges, i.e. that 50 for me, the bounce is important because that's going to control the flight height as well. So I talked a little bit earlier about seeing the ball fly through a particular window each time, and if you get too high a bounce, you would see it pop up a little bit too much, maybe too steep. You would see different results from there. So that's again coming down to that trial and error and seeing a flight and thinking, yeah, that matches my eye, what I want to see, and matching that to the bounce that you would get. So I've gone through that nice process there of trying a lot of different wedges, hitting a lot of different shots. But if you were to tick off those 3 boxes of A, making sure you get the right pitching wedge loft and the right distance, you can then marry in the next wedge that you need. Then secondly, you need to fill that gap, find something that 100 yard maybe, or maybe that half swing at 60, 70, you've got something that fills that gap there for you. And then when you get your lob wedge out, you want something that you can be versatile with. Try some different grinds, some different bounces. Can you open it up? Can you play it square faced? Are you able to play the low shot, the high shot, the medium shot? And just finding something that when you actually play these wedges, you're able to pick the right ones that are for you. So I think if you can follow those 3 steps of loft, gap, and then bounce and grind, you should be able to get the right wedges for your game.
There's 23 different options excluding the wedge works, and it can be a bit of a minefield for a golfer as to which one's best, and all I suggest to them, if it's possible, get down on the chipping green and try a few against each other, particularly for the most lofted one, and pay attention to the letter. See which one you like the best. You don't even have to know what it means or what it does, just whichever one's preferable. For you.
Yeah, definitely. And sort of fitting days, it's not just a case of come down to tights, you do a lot around the country, don't you?
We've got a lot of fitters in territories that are going round to golf courses. All the appointments and venues that we visit are on the website. You can book in, come and see us for a 45-minute session and go through this process.
Find the right wedge and don't waste your money.
Exactly that.
Get the right
or
one.
invest correctly.
Better way of looking at it. Right, well, thank you for that. Let's I think we'll have to get those in the bag, get chipping it closer now. No excuses. Especially nowadays when we're seeing lofts creep up in our iron sets, and we're seeing that gap get bigger and bigger between the pitching wedge and the next wedge, it's imperative that you go and get fit for them, because otherwise you'll have massive gaps and you've probably got 2 clubs doing the same job and you've just wasted 100 quid on a wedge. So don't do it. Go and get fit, spend a little bit of time, find the right wedge for you, and then you'll get those right wedges in your bag. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed that lesson, and I hope it helps you make better choices next time you go and buy a few wedges. Get using them. Also check out a video that's coming soon about wedge distance and controlling that, and I'll see you in another video very soon.